Hello everyone, today we talk about tutors, co-tutors, mentors and other points of reference during the doctoral research. And this video is most of, part of this series that I've started last year, revolves around my personal experience that naturally is different from the one of others. So I'm making this tales just to show how things also can differ and within even same paths that again can be different in turn from compared to others. We're talking even about the same medieval history, as institutions are different, academic cultures are different, scholars are different, and your research and you are different from any other. So it's really unavoidable, also because I don't know too much of other people's doctoral experiences, let's say, about this rest, right? How it can be in other situations. I have, however, gathered some evidence, say, from especially other countries, and I know that it does work in slightly different ways, and that in general, and again, this can vary widely, but very often this thing of the tutors, that is, those who help you in making the research and actually check your work while you're doing it and probably expect something from you, etc., can be one of the thorniest issues for the PhD student, for reasons that I will explain now. And my experience instead was unique in many ways, within, again, a same model that is normally not too pressured from the side of these figures that we'll discuss today, because practically I didn't have any control, right? It may seem strange. It was, of course, my work was controlled routinely every year, because basically if you don't work enough, if you don't produce enough, as they say sometimes, you will not be renewed the scholarship, you will not get the title, right? So it's an issue, but this has to do mostly with the greater let's say with the department, where how the broader administrative mechanism works. Of course, it stems from the evaluation of other professors. So very often are not even the same ones that are following you. At least that this was my my case. Of course, the tutor has a huge influence on this, or at least it can normally favors you. It's going to be hopefully someone you trust, and this is exactly the point. That again, this was my experience, but I've heard lots of people that actually had problems with this, and I'll try to be more precise about what I'm discussing right now. So I'm going really in chronological order, and I was undecided whether to speak of the general, how to get started and how eventually you get to know the colleagues and you learn the rules, and they tell you what to do, also didactically speaking. But this step is really crucial, because it's fundamentally in between this selection and the very first step you make once you get you pass the selection and get the place. Why? Because it straddles it as when you present your project for the PhD selection, as we have seen, you normally are I don't actually remember, but whether it was already formally decided who was presenting you. And normally it doesn't occur, because that's just a selection, so you're theoretically not connected to anyone. But I was naturally connected to my tutor, who, as I said many times, was this professor that followed me for throughout all the bachelor, the master, and the same doctorate. And she finished with me, basically, because she retired afterwards, and she's a great teacher, also very, I really get well along with her. She taught me a lot also about life in general, not just about history, but she is one of actually the greatest experts in, however, a topic that I didn't have anything to do with during the doctorate. And this may seem strange to you, but this is exactly what I want to discuss today. It was actually a pro for me, differently from many others. And obviously I was, that summer before the selection, I told you about last time, all the story, she had advised me, right, about how to do the selection, how to prepare, and all these things. And it was kind of obvious that she would have been my tutor. For a number of reasons that were internal to the department. Essentially, she had just finished following another guy that had finished that year, as a colleague of mine, also an organizer, still there, we work together. And she could finally take someone who would have been the next PhD student for medieval history in the department that, as we were saying, had just one place. And so I was, in theory, her favorite, right? And she didn't, as I explained last time, nobody really knew whether who would pass. I wasn't even the favorite in broader terms in the department of medieval history, and it was complicated to get in. You can check that video I made on the selection where I say everything. The point, though, was already here determining whether, another professor, let's say, that would have been closer to my topic, to my era, because my professor, my tutor, was actually expert about early medieval history. That's also why I made my bachelor thesis in early medieval history. And there was another professor who stayed at our department exactly up to that summer, who was actually instead the best, like one of the greatest experts in exactly the time and place that I was studying. And that I had initially approached even for the master thesis because, let's say, it was, right, my master thesis didn't really, the topic didn't really have much to do with both professors' fields of interest, but let's say the idea was that had I worked already with this guy, I would have eventually continued with him later on. But we knew that this guy would actually go away from our department. We would go to actually even the university capital of another country, so basically leaving us, and not to come back, by the way, and still to this day. And so, albeit he would have been, an interesting figure on paper, still I thought that, say, at the time I didn't know how the whole doctorate would have worked, but my same tutor told me, like, if he had stayed, you should have objectively made a doctorate with him. But since, he's gone, if you pass, as I pass later, I will follow you, right? I think it's the best thing. And then there would be a co-tutor. That was an external figure that would have been kind of actually more competent, and as it would be in my case. In fact, in the time and place I was researching, but that was kind of more external, and you would have had kind of more personal and not formal, let's say more informal, say this better, informal relation with compared to your tutor that instead stays at university, is the one that is kind of more involved in presenting you, or explaining also what you're doing in front of the other professors and all these things, aside from what you will present as a final relation every year about your research. And at the beginning, you don't know who this co-tutor would be, because first of all, you have to pass, right? But it was, in the air, just already evident that if I had passed, my tutor would have been my tutor, right? And I was glad about that, because she was the first one who would kind of take away even this problem of telling me, you should find somebody that was more expert in the field that you're studying, that you're researching, making me understand that was not particularly important. And that's why I also like her so much, because she not just let me free of working as I wanted, but first of all, she trusted me because she had followed me for all that time, for 5 years and more, 6 years at that point. And also because she realized that when I work alone and I'm not put any pressure, I really do the best as for everything. And she knew that I had a clear idea in mind, she's also the kind of I'll confess, I'll see it in the rest of the the series if we go on. The the fact that at some point, especially at the beginning, she let me too much free, right? And I don't know whether, to the point of recklessness, because at some point I didn't know what to do, and she would still say, well, okay, but you'll sort out something, and I did, but just because I was lucky to have a very important support that I will partly address also today, not from someone, but let's say from someone's work that would help me, in the research specifically, and that of course I found it by myself. By the way, after 1 year that I already had that work in my hands, but didn't realize how important it was, and spending an atrocious amount of time and work and energy doing practically nothing useful, right? Because I still always worked, but still just I didn't have very clear ideas about what I would have had to do. And in theory, the tutor should in fact guide you in this. Especially at the beginning of the doctorate, the idea is that the tutor is ahead of you, and then like in the second year you are more or less at the same level on the topic, and then by the third year should master that topic, and you should have surpassed even your tutor. Things are more complicated, but this is not really even the problem I've had, as we will see. And so the total freedom I got thanks to this tutor is crucial, because normally this doesn't happen, right? Especially in, I would say, most of the cases in PhDs that I'm aware around me, around the world, let's say, is that the tutor normally is, first of all, someone that you should even just academically ask to work under, ideally, right? Is that especially in those academic realities where scholars are a bit at the center of everything, and or other realities where, say, smaller universities that really work a bit more, not in a shady way, but let's say thinking of the student as someone that is really working for you as a professor by making a research on a topic that you basically asked for. So for this person maybe to even let you in with some recommendation or something. And at that point, with it's a sort of pact with the devil, because you have to be under this professor's guidance and impositions. And I had a bit of taste of that only after the research when I was evaluated by other professors who were a bit like that, and that immediately had this attitude like, oh, well, you should, the thesis is fine, as I passed and everything. They say if you have to modify, do this and that, and yeah, don't worry, just do what I say. Like, as if, wait a minute, like, the research is mine, right? I made it all along. Why should I do it the way you say that? You see, when there is a mistake, and said, this is a mistake, correct it, it's okay, right? This is also what my tutor would do, because, if something is wrong or it's not done well, at that point, that person has the competence of seeing that. And in fact, you don't even need a real expert, but let's say somebody that, of course, the more that person knows the topic, the better it is, ideally. But at that point, there can be a massive interference exactly on that same base that I don't know how far it can go, honestly. I've known of other colleagues also in the rest of the department that had some issues, not just some with the research in general, because they weren't really making it, but sometimes with this kind of check and request almost that the professors would make about their work while we're still working. It's complicated, and maybe I will discuss them for what I've known in another video at the end of the series, because it's really not the experience I've had. But I immediately understood that the mindset about this research is very often much more restrictive, dirigistic, kind of oppressive even, right? For example, as far as I've been told, for what is going on with the PhD students that arrived later now at the department, is that after COVID, the professors have demanded them much more, a much tighter control on what they are making every year. Something at the point of literally how it's normal on average also in the rest of universities, that is to say, they have to literally write an entire part of the thesis already to show at various times and many times during the research, and also pretty consistent stuff that, for example, I could have not produced because my thesis was just putting a lot of things together, and until the end that structure wouldn't consolidate. It would have been useless to make already made pieces, finished pieces of something greater that had to take form for them to have sense for me. It would have been very difficult, and I think in fact it would have damaged greatly my work. And these people now are forced to do that because after COVID, at least when there was the emergency and you couldn't go to libraries, to archives especially, many researchers were crippled significantly in time and in quality and in output properly because of these limitations. But a kind of paranoia spread to the point that the student came to pay for it, right? It were mostly the professors that didn't want these students to fail and didn't want to depend on them fundamentally for the department to keep receiving the money for the scholarship, to see that these were effective students that would research well. And albeit I didn't really see any of this because the only check I had was at the end of the year, and I had just to tell what I did, and it was so generic in a way that even though I would produce important evidence, including say part of the work how I was writing, especially at the end of the second year, it was nothing like this. The only thing that I witnessed is that at the end of my first year, there was a girl, I was a colleague who basically arrived. She was at the end, the third year, and a few months before the end, she simply entered panic and she called one of our colleagues, one who organizes the stuff that had finished the year before mine, and began to tell him that she wasn't anywhere near the end, right? Because she had objectively worked, she had even carried out the research. It's just she hadn't put the work together yet, and that was okay. I don't know the personal vicissitudes, but let's say that didn't sound very right in my opinion. In any case, this situation ruined. Let's say seemingly I didn't participate to the thing, but I was told that it paralyzed the professors. The department reunited, was an emergency meeting, all the thing, because for no reason you can't fail at that point, and so they inserted this kind of almost Soviet style, structuralist, blindly materialistic, necessary request of making a kind of a fake didactic activity to prove that you were working. You had to make a conference that summer in which we would have had to discuss or something completely useless. I remember some professors even there, while we were forced to stay there, also to listen all the other people's research. That she was a very famous professor. She had come there, and I was just sitting behind her in the class while there were these guys exposing, and she was typing on her phone. And I remember to anyone, but oh my god, this is like a third world thing, literally in the because it was ridiculous. That's the hypocrisy that I don't care. It was, by the way, also damaging the people who that had the largest amount of work, like me, by the way, who was in that sense also not looked upon with particular favor by all the professors because it wasn't entirely clear yet to them what I was actually doing. And even when I presented the work, they wouldn't kind of believe it. And that's how far, let's say, narrow-mindedness and paranoia and properly even intellectual deafness at some point can arrive, because let's say I was working well, and I knew what I was doing, and it took time, however, to define that, because again, that's the point of the entire research, right? There is not such a thing like a safe bet. I didn't have any of that. There is nobody who explains you what a doctorate is before you get in it. You're also supposed to know certain things without having ever done them before. How is it even possible? In fact, I found some more enlightened younger researchers that were also extremely cultured individuals. I mean, slightly older than us, maybe 10 years older, that told us exactly this, that we should be left more free to be more productive. Instead, as far as I know, PhDs today, most places are, especially in the Anglosphere, it's just, you have to produce a certain amount of articles every year. What for? I mean, you're making an entire research. This research should be meaningful and deep, and you should take time. You should go around, you should research, you should read, you should talk with someone. You should take your time, and all they want is to squeeze this further for just showing that you do something. This is also the reason why basically in the last 50 years from certain academic cultures, basically nothing came out of any relevance. This is, the quality of historical work has dramatically sunk. The call for papers thing, the same scholarships, everything is become just a circus. It's just for the university to make money fundamentally. There is no other purpose in terms of actual scientific quality. And it's evident in front of everyone, and there is also an atrociously disgusting amount of, in fact, recommendation in this sense. And there are some countries that have become just creating PhDs in industrial quantities, and they just know, because when you make, let's say, there is the selection in certain international institutions, you see that these people unblock are worse, right? And nobody even cares about a PhD who comes from a certain place, because they know that they're useless. There are very few academic cultures that are dying right now. Probably, I must say, I was in the last place, maybe where the exception was, where this system worked well and the quality was really elite, because when we go abroad even to make, again, selections, we win the places all the time. We are requested abroad, and the system that has nothing to do, again, with scientific quality, but just with kind of some sort of economical business, is just not, it has nothing to do with science, with the quality of the work, with the purpose why it should be a research or anything, right? It's the same reason why, I don't know, my same tutor, great name, also abroad, was asked to participate to the largest, I don't know if you know it, but the largest medieval history, let's say, better, council, who use this hierarchical name, is in Leeds. And they asked her to come at their expenses, right? In my country, if you call a professor, you host him, you pay all the expenses. You see the complete different mindset towards what this has become, or what even scholarly figures are supposed to be. And that's very interesting, because in that world, the scholarly figures are more important than the sources, whereas here it's the other way around. We have great scholars to be revered exactly because they care about not scholarship, they care about history itself. And sadly enough, this world is dying. We're seeing it. Our departments are shrinking. We don't have any money. This is a problem also of our state. It's not just but the models that we had up to this point objectively had some qualitative standard that I haven't met anywhere. And this is not just to brag, to say, oh, okay, you come from, because I know my limits. But exactly because I know my limits, I know that I've done much better than whatever I see around, and therefore I see what the hell, right? I had the opportunity to really do great because I was in a good environment that allowed me to fulfill my potential. Other places are just all tiny squeezed researches that have to be minimally ultra perfect with nothing basically connected with them around, and just faking, right? Learning how to produce paper that is worthless, that doesn't add anything eventually to, it's formally perfect, but substantially empty, right? There is nothing in there. It doesn't kind of expand any horizon. It's just, I feel sorry even for the trees that were cut down to make the paper for printing those articles that nobody will read anyway. And there is an inflation of them. That is, nobody can even read them anymore. And it's becoming ridiculous, and it's flattening also the intellectual horizons of people, because people before formed themselves on less works but better ones, right? And their mind was just more developed. At this point, it's the other way around. You basically just have to calculate the mathematical time to cover all what is being published, and 95% of that is trash, right? So it habituates you to mediocrity at all levels, not to produce anything consistent on your own, by emulation, by osmosis. And at the end of the day, you wonder why the world sucks, right? The world sucks simply because, the only thing that distinguished us from the rest was our top Western quality. At this point, that is flattening, and of course there is nothing anywhere to replace it, even remotely. And it's going to be disastrous for everyone. Right, and this is a huge problem that, again, I always talk about. And when I look at the path that I had doctorally, again, it's I really understand where and how quality comes from. Right, and I can't say that because I don't think I'm a particularly intelligent person. I just studied a lot, and so maybe I see things a bit more in depth than the average. I have more criticism. I was also lucky. But why? Because I had the time and the opportunity to expose myself willingly to further knowledge and inquiry, which is something that I don't see basically in any other field, not even within my own, and anywhere else properly in the community, in any other scientific or humanistic field. There is nothing. And I don't know why, and it's just like a big joke. It's becoming ever more descriptive and ever less analytical. And they don't let us experiment anymore. Because again, they prefer to have like the safer investment at a short term than thinking bigger and achieving greater civilizational goals, even with greater risk. I wanted the risk. I didn't want, the safe lifeboat that, when you can have really a warship and, going for it in the struggle. There is probably no hope structurally, and I think, or systemically, for how really changes are occurring all over the world. And therefore, I am proud, I must say, of having made this path that, however, I don't really brag too much about, because as I explain you also in these videos, everything is much, let's say, I must say, throughout all my path, I thought the things were much more serious than I thought eventually they would be. And not because they weren't serious, right? But because I expected more, because I thought that the system was more. Instead, it's not. And this was even supposed to be the best anywhere. This is the issue. Right, I say the best anywhere because literally my faculty was prized as the best in Europe. So the question, exactly in the year which I accomplished my doctoral task, so I can afford to say that without hypocrisy. But again, I will tell you it for what it is, not making you say, oh wow, then this guy's just top for some reason. No, I'm not. I'm just, again, a normal person that did this and was lucky enough, as we've seen also in the selection, to get in, to make it. And you'll see also the difficulties I've had. But those are the ones that ultimately form you in many ways. And there is also not much afterwards, right? There is really not much afterwards either. So don't think that the PhD is, solving your life problems, because it's really not. In my case, I don't have many life problems at all, so I was still a positive experience in the first place, and an advantageous one. But let's say, aside from the fact of saying, okay, Schwerpunkt is talking about his title and everything, there is really nothing else beyond that gullibility. And that's why I presume you follow me, because you know that you can trust me about being real and somewhat objective about what I'm talking about, not really making making this whole thing pass for something that is not. So after I passed, I think I met with my tutor and we agreed that we had to meet because I was still finishing my master, which I got because anxiety never ends after I actually passed the selection. And we talked about this. She congratulated me and said, okay, I will follow you. Is it fine? I said, of course, it's fine. There was also, you see, the interesting thing of our department is that there were still these older professors. It could have been my parents, let's say. In fact, I think my tutor was just, say, 1 year older than my mother, just for saying that. And so that it's also, she was from our same, not really from the same city, but from the same, say, cultural background, in a sense, very similar. We understood each other, very, very practically oriented. And I was good with that. And the interesting thing is that, of course, there were other professors who could always ask, right? She was sharing, for example, still the office with another professor who was instead. She was actually much better than her, I must say that. But she studied something else completely as well, and she was also less approachable. And also I will talk about her because she was, I impressed her at some point for something I did unexpectedly. And this was a person who also had some degree of, authority and kind of, she was not particularly inclined to be benevolent towards researchers, etc. But she took me at some point in her office and she asked me exactly certain things about how I was doing. She was interested and she wanted to know what I was doing, mostly because at that point it was not clear what I was doing after the first year, and so she was somewhat the most authoritative to find out, and she was satisfied with the answer because at some point, again, as we will see, I had objective difficulties in explaining what I was doing, right? Not much what I wanted to do or what the point was, but how I was practically doing it. Because again, at the first year, you can't factually know it, right? Unless you really have an idea or how it's going to be. You see, the main difference is whether you have the sources or not. That's the greatest problem. I mean, every historian works with nothing but sources, and I needed I had plenty of sources, just they weren't formally ordered in a way I could easily browse them and finding what I wanted to do. Also historiographically, not just the direct sources. And only at a point I found that, and then I discovered that also my colleagues had the same problem. But they were apparently much more confident about that. Instead, I realized that was an issue. That there should be also for researchers a kind of point of reference in terms of, okay, I want to research this. With whom can I talk that can even giving me a list of things I have to study? Of course, there's no such thing, and that's why, in a sense, you learn how to make a doctorate, because you can't even ask your tutors at the end of the day. Tutors don't even know what you have in mind fundamentally, and they can't make the list for you, and it's kind of even humiliating, right? I remember, as we'll see now, when I called my co-tutor that would have had the one who should have given me some extra information, he basically told me he didn't know, really. And the co-tutor thing happened like that. Basically, the first thing we did when I got in, I don't remember what it was, literally the first thing I got acquainted with my colleagues or whatever, because eventually you have to partly work together during didactical activities. They're terrifying, but fortunately also very limited. Not that I didn't like them, at least most of them, but it was rather about being brought to do things together when you actually are working on your own at the end of the day. So basically there is this meeting in which you have to speak in front of all the professors' department, introducing yourself and your research and saying, I want to do this and that. And on the basis of this explanation, in the same session, they will tell you essentially who does want to follow him. And so okay, my tutor stepped in, but at that point they have to choose your co-tutor. That, as we have seen, the tutor, I mean, if you find the expert in the field within the same university, within the same department, it's great, right? And so at that point you will find the best in just one person. As I was saying, my tutor was not expert at all, nor in military history, nor in that specific time that I was studying. So she would have been extremely useful in correcting my work, because she used pure logic and she would correct everything, and she was always right. She was terrifying, right? But also extremely useful, because she would correct even the commas, right? And an extraordinary work that she didn't even have to do, right? So an extreme luck to have her, first of all. But of course, the broader interest also of the department, given that, as I was exemplifying before, they're terrorized by the idea that you can fail in some ways, is providing you with also the top expert in the field. Now, I will not reveal at this point what really my topic of research was. It's something that we discuss also on here. Never actually made videos about the issue per se, but at least I talk about historical context, etc. And it being a strictly military historical topic, by the way, and considering that in my country, and as in generally speaking in the West, military history is also, again, elsewhere, military history is not studied particularly well, nor much, first of all. And the same professors at this meeting wouldn't properly even understand what my research would have ended up in, and it sounded also kind of more political, social than strictly military. They picked a guy, they proposed at least a guy that would have had to be contacted at that point, who is, in fact, one of the greatest international authorities on that exactly time and place I was studying. And interestingly enough, he's also a guy who was born in another country but came to study here and to live here, to teach here. And he was already retired at the time, but open, of course, to this. Also because he is friend with these professors of the department. I mean, my tutor, this other professor I mentioned before. And so it's a very famous figure. I mean, even I remember also my ex that I met later on, as a contemporary, she knew that, and also from another country for some reason she knew. And this guy is very famous, to the point that it was even just a great honor for me to be followed by him. And I said, and again, when you start, you have no idea how it's going to be. Right, and of course, the main concern, at least of mine, is that these people are not, humanly speaking, or characterly speaking, whatever you prefer to term and think, the best for you. That is, again, like the guy who checked my work in the exam, the top actual expert more on military history, and I don't remember why they didn't choose him, frankly. Possibly because he lived in another city, and this other guy instead lived here and was also kind of closer to the entourage of these professors. But let's say that guy would immediately step in and wanted to intervene. I would have not tolerated this in my work, honestly. And so the idea is I wanted to establish kind of a good relation with this person, and hopefully getting some important advice and information and whatever, and having great talks, right? I still saw it in these terms, like you have the opportunity of having this private contact with this great expert, should be wow, right? Humanly speaking, it's not always like this. And the reason why he was chosen again was just the following, that he had written objectively a lot about some military aspects, but they were all politically and socially declined. That is to say, he wouldn't study basically any battle or actual armament. And I studied his entire bibliography and actually found even some mistakes about those topics in his work. But this person is so influential for the simple reason that he had a huge historiographical production, in fact, that I had to cover entirely, about topics that, again, he would dominate. I can tell you his nationality because it's, say, this is not important now, but it comes from still one of these important continental traditions of ours that, again, you look upon with great admiration, albeit it was somewhat Marxistically influenced, because he's a person that objectively knew an enormity of things. Like those people that are, he was born, I think, were still, when there was World War II going on. It was simply another time where people who studied to be professors were actually highly educated people. I mean, really educated people, not like today's, where nobody is educated, including professors. We're talking about people, again, that read everything, that had an enormous set of cultural references, of linguistical skills, of competence, of a great mind, right? The only point being that, yes, he had studied all this military stuff, but let's say it was just military. It was not the art of war. He studied the importance of certain military elements, not just single individuals, but say the system of this community, to say a lot of things eventually from a social and political point of view, also socio-economical in a sense. He was Marxistically influenced, say, but not so much to actually depauperate his work of quality. It's just that it came from those currents that, again, had never studied the actual military historical deal and the art of war and all these things, that instead were in fact more the guy would evaluate me in the end, and all properly a certain set of other scholars that, albeit few and writing a few, were properly about more the art of war, and so my topic. So I was very honored. It's that other older, colder professor who proposed him during that session when I spoke in front of everyone, and I said, "Wow, I'm honored. Let's do this." They gave me his phone number and etc. And I phoned him, and they had talked with him about me already because they were interested in already testing the ground with him when it was available. And this professor always, lots of conferences everywhere, writing. And so I one day that autumn, I think it was in October, I phoned him to establish this communication. And I said, I introduced myself. I spoke also. I didn't speak his own language at the phone, but I nailed the pronunciation of his very composite name that probably he was impressed by. But the conversation was actually very disappointing because I explained him roughly what I wanted to do. And while it is true that, it was actually a very frank communication, because I said, I want to do this, right? I want to research this specific aspect, and I want to know if you have some idea about this, right? If you can help me, if I have an idea of what I could do. And he answered very straightforwardly. He told me, I know nothing about this topic, like this. And he told me, just, do you know that guy that eventually would have made me the exam at the end of the... yes, of course, so read everything that he wrote. And I said, I have already read him, and there is nothing about what I want to research. And he said, nothing. So it seemed immediately that we had very different ideas about the whole thing, and actually that was the only call that I ever had with him. The only one. I mean, basically this co-tutor would have had the pillar been ideally like the, let's say, not the pillar of my research, because it was not meant to be was just a help, right? That for which he's actually a co-tutor. Probably everybody realized that my tutor would have been a more important person for me, even as a non-expert on my topic, than this guy. But this guy, in theory, they just put you together. Like it's the elective affinities, where let's see how they react chemically. There was no chemical reaction. We remained separated, and I said, okay, you just told me you know nothing about my work, so what have you been talking with you for? And that's how it went. I just wrote him a couple of times, and probably at the end of the doctorate, even made some kind of negative impression, because I wouldn't write him further. First of all, I was, as you know, I had a huge issue psychologically at the very end. Not because of the doctorate, it's nothing to do with that. I was actually happy because of my sentimental issues. I had 1 year of mental disorder that I fortunately surpassed, but I was in full control of myself. I didn't have any issue in that sense, but let's say I was very down, and I can assure that even writing an email was at some point like an enormous burden. And I would have not known what to tell him, by the way, because I knew that I would have had to still correct my thesis over time before publishing it. So I just sent him, well, okay, we'll see that. It's not much of a deal to explain this now, but just for saying that not everything that is expected to work is going to work, or you should neither worry about it too much. Right, because things will work fine in the same way. Let's say the guy aided me more with his published works than with his personal commitment. Right, he was always very well, also later on I had to send him some part of unfinished work because of the aforementioned Sovietic means of checking whether I was working or not. And he was probably bothered by that because nobody liked this thing. The students didn't like it. The professors didn't like it. It was just extra useless work for something that would have had to finish in the year later, by the way. So completely ridiculous things that just bureaucracy, administration, and this, again, kind of, Soviet-style idea of production was really about more than else. And so I was on my own in many ways, and I will make another video in which I will explain how I was on my own and how I had to make the entire research without any help. Because besides, so what's the role of the tutor? The tutor, as we've seen, has this more formally administrative role. I don't remember exactly what she had to do, but she would have had to, whether it was formal or informal, but she was like the guarantee that it was working. And not just because, we were in good terms, but because she had to properly show that and, make a formal statement about it or something. They had to sign the fact that it could pass next year. This co-tutor has basically no role whatsoever. It's just anyone that can be anyone, right? If, I don't know, I wanted to have as co-tutor my trusty butcher, at the corner of my block, I could use him, right? But no, I don't have any trusty butcher at the corner of my block. But just an example, right? That is there is no law about this. It's just an informal thing, and also you can simply ask whoever you want. I mean, normally, even today, I sometimes write to professors when I want to know something, if they have an advice or they can't tell me so. And I mostly like to read, because all answers at the end of the day are just in books, in articles, right? Letters are not really meant to, or phone calls are not really meant to substitute those. Just for all the things you can compose through a proper historical knowledge. But of course, it would be you can't call anyone, and I wouldn't use many support externally. As I will explain probably in the video about didactics, I interacted with external professors. it was an interesting experience by some degree, but it was also perfectly useless for my research. Where another was just a waste of time. But in terms of some other mentors that I could have, I thought of other people. I even thought of using as co-tutor a figure that was probably the main reason why I actually became a true expert in the art of war and in the Clausewitzian theory that had a massive influence also on Schwerpunkt, for that matter, in a completely indirect way because he never even knew. This was an economist, actually, but he was much more famous for being a military historian. I was about to dedicate my thesis also among the other people to him, and he died just before I could completely suddenly. And that left an enormous sense of emptiness within me because, it was not just, aside from the human who was quite interesting. I already met him once, right? Of all the places in the world where he could be, I discovered we were neighbors. It was completely random because I met him on the internet. I knew of him in a completely different way. We just visited with other people of this community that we studied military history together, a military museum here, and an expo, and that was my thing. And this happened, by the way, before that summer, that spring before I started my PhD. And I asked this guy on that occasion, because we came back home on the subway together, some advice on that. It was a unique experience, completely random. I was very lucky in doing that. And I understood immediately, first of all, this was a very reserved person, didn't want to have anything to do with other people's works, etc. So I understood it immediately. I would have done the same because I'm not really making alms to anyone for that reason. But he was actually the reason why I even chose my PhD topic, because I began to toy with that essentially after I read an article of his. And of course, there were many other reasons that date back to my childhood why I chose the PhD topic that I chose. But let's say that guy gave me through his work, an enormous method, critical capacity, also even just expertise and evidence, right, on which to work, etc. And that perhaps was the greatest help retrospectively in an academic sense that I could receive, even though he was not an academic either. Or he had been, but he had bailed out at some point because he was not. He would shut many doors, and so that's also part of where my work was coming from, because the reason why I would want to make that topic that eventually nobody would understand at university what the hell it was and why I was researching it and how was I doing it, when nobody actually knew anything about that, and I had to battle even just to make my professors understanding the most basic things about the same topic I was making, not about my research, but just like the differences I can tell you between, I don't know, military history and art of war, things like that. That would also contribute to inimitate some of them, or at least to appear under a negative light of some sort, and rather than say at the beginning I had much more confused ideas than in the end. Let's put it in this way. But let's say I objectively struggled with, and I still do, even here, to make people understand what it is like the art of war and a strategic culture and education. I don't know how many people actually understand it. Most people just follow me because the work I do is historical, but they don't really understand war. They don't understand warfare, nor politically, not militarily, in fact, nor socially, right? Even at what's tactics and what's strategy by definition, or even studying the Funkrieg, or maybe listening or understanding Funkrieg, but not understanding it. fully or properly for the work that it is, right? I mentioned this en passant. Maybe some of you don't even know that I made that content and think that Schwerpunkt is just, this kind of, eccentric channel that talks mostly about medieval history in a ideologically traditional / conservative sense. That's just epiphenomenological idea. Like if that's your view, if you just follow me, let's say, because I make a new video every day, but you don't have curiosity in the rest of the content, or you don't really know my past work, it's very difficult for Schwerpunkt to be useful to you, and especially for yourself to be useful to yourself, in fact, in order to understand at least the topics that I discuss, not much my content per se, right? So it's always a matter of barriers and frontier, and that they take a lot of time to try to bring you through these boundaries and to see how it is from the other side. But everything I do here really passes through that broader experience, and that's why I decided to share it with you. Like, why am I doing this doctoral tales series now? Because as you will see, hopefully, it will tell how difficult it is really to make a PhD, because I care about people getting it right. I'm sure there are other videos on the internet of people saying, I will tell you how it was, my experience, like, 30 minutes to explain what you did in 4 years. You'll never make the audience understand how it was. You will just essentially show off by saying, okay, look at me. For me, I felt like this, I felt like that, and then it ends in a few minutes. No, here it was like hell. Like, you had to do things that you have no idea how to do practically, right? So my point is that I hope I can be useful, because what I say can be practically and positively applied in some ways that can at least make you wary, because I didn't have any of this. Again, I went in like it was a step in the dark. I had no idea how it would be. I had to learn everything on my own. And that's why also today's topic is so meaningful, because I probably already depicted as most things, an idea of loneliness, for which I'm also very proud, because again, everything I've done it by myself. That the aid I received was just a true aid by, again, mostly my tutor and other people that, of course, helped me in other ways. I can think about the secretaries. I can think about the library. In this concrete work, everybody has to do their work well, their job well, and they did. And those were sometimes better at their job than some professors that were supposed to help me. And I'm not talking about my co-tutor. We will see going on what I mean. Because, again, while it is true, because you see, what I also make you worry about on Schwerpunkt is the complexity of reality. But at the same time, the idea that this is not an excuse to make a relativism about that. The fact that a system is complex doesn't mean that if you just understand a tiny part, you can simply behave as if the rest did not exist. The rest does exist, and it informs that part. So it's not really about your opinion how it should be. It's just in one way that you should find out. So when you interact with other people, that, like professors, that by the way are, supposed to have that kind of open-mindedness that you have, which open-mindedness doesn't mean being a leftist, which is the new semantics of open-mindedness today. Open-mindedness today means that you are basically able to integrate further knowledge into the system that you have already created effectively, right? So it's typical of minds that are very structured and very systematic and very methodic and conscientious and analytical and critical at the same time. And so when you see, that's where you meet the intelligent person, when you meet the person who's really not, where in another, when the person wants to enforce something on you by pretending to know things that they don't. That's where they make a false step. That's when they assume that things are in a way that they haven't the palest idea of how they are. I'm not talking about feelings. I'm talking about actual scientific evidence, and that's why we are historians in the first place, because we're not writing again the history of our lives. You will see how difficult using that properly those tools actually is, and that's why also you need a bit the history of your life, because concentrating on the right things, you can show people how concrete and practical certain things are. So in many ways this adventure was terrifying, but it was rendered beautiful for me. Maybe for another person it's different, by the fact that it was completely alone, that it was completely on my own, that I worked without any pressure, and that I worked well, because that's how I make an extraordinary amount of work if I'm left alone doing it, which is, I give you kind of the opposite of how people normally work, but because probably I was motivated, most people are not, and so maybe it's easy to say, this person is different, let's give in, let's watch him, so that maybe he's not fooling us, and we can find eventually we can find it in time. The point though is that other people do not really work in the same way. For example, other colleagues I've seen, I've met, first of all, in a sense, of course, they never found out what the hell they were doing there, which is also kind of typical, realizing you start a PhD and you don't like it, or you just got in but you have no idea what you wanted to do with it, or maybe you got in because you wanted just to stop working in the meanwhile, as I also found in the colleagues, and I wasn't like that. I was doing it for learning history, for going on with my career through that, right? Not because that was the aim, but principally because I wanted to answer that question that everybody said, but it's complex, how do you do it? Nobody's ever done this, you usually don't make this kind of research. Instead, I did even more than what I had foreseen I could do myself at the beginning. That's the other thing, never fool yourself. You can't. There are things that you can't do. It's not about being, we will see how that plays, right, in determining what you think you can achieve or not. Because again, once I was given the sources in an orderly way, I found them because somebody had made the work, by the way, and I was extremely lucky. I could do everything because I had the certainty that those were all the sources I needed, and that they completed the whole picture. So I was extremely lucky in a way. But there are people that simply need others, right? Characterly speaking, I am just a path maker. Like, I make my own path, and I follow it, and that's how I go on with my life, with everything. There are other people, again, so very dear colleagues of mine in this PhD, that instead are just followers, in a sense. That is, their path making is essentially inversely functioning. That is to say, they follow the one of others and they collect what they find on the trail. Quite terribly exposed, but quite so, right? This, for example, this obsession of spending the entire life outside, attending conferences. Okay, you can build up a culture like that, but at the same time, you're wasting a lot of time of what you could do individually, right? And conferences, yes, you have to wait eventually things to be published. They're not just the sound source that you really need. But you just, because some people just fall in love with scholars. They want to follow them. They want to know them. They want to we had, it's like with my co-tutors. I saw them. I said, wow, this guy, it's great that my professor thought of him as a co-tutor. I talked to him and I really understood, do you know this? No, I don't know nothing about that. Sorry. Okay, bye. That's it. Right, I didn't need to phone him again or to hear what I was doing, what the hell, because that was also an extra work. It was just asking him to do something that legally he didn't have to do at all, because it's not that tutors or co-tutors are obliged to make the work for you, or to they're evaluated, they have any legal responsibility. No, you are also on your own, and the sooner you understand that, the better it is, right? You cannot have as an alibi for not working, just attending conferences, going out there, writing articles about things that basically have nothing even to do with the research, while you're not doing any research, just because the scholarship covers the travel costs and everything, and so you want to exploit that. I didn't quite need that. I overly abused of the library system, especially during COVID, where they could scan everything, because before you just had to go there physically. And it was even there. I was extremely lucky with the timing and everything, even with COVID, which sounds pretty dark to say, but so it is, cynically speaking. It's thanks to COVID that I made it, even in many ways, and that's something you cannot predict, right? That's also what you had to get yourself in mind. Would you have predicted it would have been a major pandemic in a in your doctoral path, right? That's no, like most things, like other things that would happen to me during my doctoral path, like starting, being heartbroken, getting an anxiety disorder, getting in a relationship, falling out of that relationship, and not giving a damn, by the way, about that one, and having problems with environmentally. That didn't make me sleep at some point, having to quarrel with people, other stuff are happening around, also not pleasant one. You have no idea, and you have to put that into account. So in that perspective, depending on someone else, right, unless it's something particularly advantageous that of course you hope you can also just, given that these tutors fulfill their own role habitually, and so they can help you after all. However, it's not just a great idea. The most important thing in our research is what you do. And sometimes we will talk about the imposter syndrome. That is just a way, again, to distract yourself from the main point, that you have no idea what the hell you're doing there, which is the most terrifying thing that can happen to you, probably, in that best of researcher. And that, in part, is basically summing up all your fears about that you always had anywhere, right? When you score success, when you pass somewhere, when you succeed, when you achieve something, you say, but did I actually earn it? Like all this celebration around me, this idea of self-fulfillment, etc. Is it really it? In part it is, in part it's not, and that under the greater pressure you're under, let's say, and the more you are able to discern that, to separate the two things, where at least even if you can't, just to acknowledge that sometimes you just have to be very lucky, and at the same time, however, you also have to be very good and to do something concrete, which is not easy. But we will talk about this psychological aspect later on. But let's say again about the idea of following others' ideas, etc. It's good as long as that builds your own work. Otherwise, I never ask for an advice. On the contrary, my decision making regarding the steps I made in the research was mostly something that I had to defend, because I thought they were right, and it turned out they were as hell, and even more than I thought myself. But I wouldn't understand it myself, and others wouldn't understand it myself, but I had to follow a path. There is a Clausewitzian concept within this, that is, once you have chosen an objective, it doesn't make sense, if you haven't fully invested yourself in it, to step back and to restart from zero. It just doesn't happen. It's a waste of resources, of time. It will not work. It's better for you to pursue that path, unless of course the complete failure arrives and so you are wrong on everything, and so. But otherwise, it's better to remain within that track than making radical changes in between, right? So That's also, and that's a real problem. That's not a magic trick to always succeed. You can easily fail. This is what von Clausewitz says as well, and about war. Doctoral research is a bit, it's a better experience, to put it mildly, and so, in a sense, you're even more advantaged to actually succeed, and in a sense you're favored once you're in that position, because that's also what you're expected to do and how others also do. I didn't meet with particular failures. Yes, I did. Probably some were clothed. I mean, I wasn't talking about my failures, but somebody else's failures. Probably, right? There is another thing about this general experience, which fundamentally springs from the fact that people can be very hypocritical, right? They can also convince themselves of being, again, in paradise while they're not. And that's especially the first attitude that you have, especially when you have all the years in front of you and say, wow, now I just don't have to do much, or at least I can't take my time, and maybe going on vacations, etc. Things are much more serious and complicated than they seem. And the sooner you realize them, the better. This is the only problem. Until you finish, you haven't really acquired the amount of knowledge necessary to actually finish, to actually even start for that end to arrive, right? So everyone's dream in life in general is to go back when you actually have learned the lesson, to go back and to do the thing right. And of course it's impossible, but that's the same reason why we put ourselves under stress and we test our limits and we struggle for achieving something, and there's no other way to learn. So that's the purpose of the research after all. And what else to say about this? I can't really find any meaningful figures that helped me during the doctorate. Of course, my family was as always, very supportive. That contributed dramatically. I was talking before about the guy who wrote the work that helped me getting out of the impasse of the first year, that I also wrote to, and that who answered me just this year after more than 1 year, because he didn't check his Facebook message requests. And who was the author of this extraordinary work that I used fundamentally to derive all the sources. It was mostly about that. It basically made a story of a hyper detailed story of the times and places that I was studying, only for my century, only for that specific thing, because otherwise there would have not been. So I was extremely lucky. I didn't know that this thing existed. I even had it, but I hadn't read it. And so I discovered it just 1 year after I began the PhD, and it was terrifying because I could have earned 1 year, right? That's how brutal things are. But day by day, he listed all the sources for all the events. And so I could simply read this stuff and reading for the military events, all the sources that were indicated. So basically analyzing every single battle, every single campaign on my own with the sources that I knew were there. And it was the greatest, my thesis was really something, right? I hope to publish it one day because it's an example of method, if anything, aside from the size that is, dreadful, but it's just something that is not done anymore, because normally we don't have this comprehensive amount of knowledge that this guy wrote. This book eventually was published and reviewed kind of properly as a history book, but this guy was an engineer. He was just very passionate about the 14th century, made this thing that not even my professors knew, and that is extremely useful. And by the way, working with historiography at the same time, because my worry was, but maybe this guy left some source out. How do I know if I just base my work on him? Of course, I read all the historiography on the topic in the meanwhile, in parallel, and surprise, surprise, not just the historiography was using the same sources and nothing else, but also the former work had even more of that, a more detailed, more in-depth analysis than the same scholarship. So it was, one of my greatest. It's a treasure, and also because I'm the only one working on this in this way now. The others, you see, historiography just became so closed and within itself that doesn't even realize how, again, doesn't allow experience like minds to occur, so that they could have somebody who operates on another level, because they have sclerotized, in a non coming back direction. Of course, hopefully, also my work now, I'm writing articles like crazy, probably will open something, but maybe I will be one day remembered because of this, because I began that. But it's really, the silliest thing. You see, the comparison I was making before about my formation, my education, let's say, is that with that colleague that said follows professors as opposed to mine, we had the same university timing, right? We went to classes together, etc. And he was telling me, I remember that class we had such great professor, it was such a great topic. We really had a unique experience that now students don't have anymore, because there are two young professors and they will not remember. And while I agreed with the fact that that was a very interesting class and everything, that we learned a lot of things through those books, etc., at the same time I thought that was nothing in comparison to what, like, a medievalist, he's a modernist, but doesn't matter, still kind of medieval, what kind of real comprehensive medieval history education should be. And I can tell you that Schwerpunkt, for example, was much more useful than my university at the end of the day in terms of quantitative knowledge, but probably also a certain broader view of the whole medieval history. That is something that no university professor that I know has. And I'm not kidding, because of course I began to cover everything every day in depth, of some depth of sort that not even professors in general really have for topics that they don't research. And of course you get a completely different perspective. You get a completely different, a much more insightful view. And it's thanks to this, I think that Schwerpunkt helped me much more with the thesis than the thesis that did help Schwerpunkt. And I'm not kidding. And that's why I'm also making this, because the advantage that I got from this is enormous. And if you don't do it, you unfortunately can't understand it. And I didn't know it before. And that's why, again, it's so satisfying in many ways. Why I like doing this, why I think that this should go on, it should be watched, etc. Because it has a purpose that, again, on the internet here is not seen. It's not. I make videos. I have 5,600 subscribers. Make videos that make 100 views. Like one person out of 50 watches. The question is, I know it's a joke, right? But I do it for myself. That's the point, right? And maybe if somebody wakes up and somebody does understand that, of course, among my followers, well, it can't be more useful than you think. But it's an invitation to do the same, fundamentally, if you can, which unfortunately in this world is becoming ever less possible, and that's an issue and a problem. In any case, for today I stop it here. Of course I will keep talking about this thing, because also I have to explain you what was my interaction with my tutor during the work, because it was at some point really important, and I learned things that I didn't know, so through that assistance, right? So, and aside from the work that I was basically taken away because she did it in my stead in some, talking just about correction, and quite linguistic ones, and the most logical ones I had to fix myself in the historical evidence and all. She didn't know anything about the background, but that's how important that person can be. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.